No one in the audience that night could have predicted what they were about to witness. What began as laughter would soon turn to silence. And in that silence, careers would tremble, reputations would fracture, and one woman would draw a line that changed everything. It started like any other late-night show. The lights were bright, the cameras steady, and the familiar theme music filled the studio with warmth. Jennifer Aniston stepped out, radiant as ever, her calm smile lighting up the stage. The crowd roared. For a moment, everything felt normal. She waved, settled into her chair, and crossed her legs gracefully. A veteran of countless interviews, she knew the rhythm, the small talk, the scripted charm that kept the show moving. But beneath the laughter, something darker was waiting. Across from her, Jimmy Kimmel leaned back in his chair, smiling a little too wide. His jokes began harmlessly, polished and practiced, each one designed to keep the audience comfortable. He complimented her new streaming project, teased her about her character's romantic misfortunes, and drew polite laughter from the crowd. Jennifer laughed along, at first. Her posture relaxed, her tone light. It was the same routine she had performed hundreds of times before. But there was something in his tone, a faint edge beneath the charm. A flicker of intent that even the audience did not yet sense. Kimmel's smile never faltered, but his eyes glimmered with calculation. Then came the first shift. "So, Jennifer," he said, tapping his cards lightly, "I have to ask, how's your love life these days? The tabloids have been very busy." The crowd chuckled softly, expecting gossip. But Jennifer's smile faded almost instantly. The tension was invisible to most, but those close enough could see her eyes sharpen. Jimmy leaned in. "Come on, everyone's talking about that so-called love triangle. You cannot just ignore it forever." Jennifer exhaled slowly. "Jimmy, you know I prefer to keep my private life private," she said, her voice calm but tight. "I am here to talk about my work." The air in the room began to shift. The audience laughed again, but not as loudly. Something about her tone had changed the rhythm of the room. Instead of taking the hint, Kimmel pressed harder. "Oh, come on, Jennifer," he said with mock innocence. "At your age, do you not think it is time to settle down? You know, the biological clock and all that." The words landed like a blow. The laughter stopped. The cameras captured a flicker of disbelief in Jennifer's eyes, hurt, then anger. Decades of interviews had prepared her for tough questions, but not this. Not tonight. Her jaw tightened, her hands pressed against the chair's arms. The silence in the studio was deafening. Even the band shifted uncomfortably. "What exactly are you implying, Jimmy?" she asked, her tone sharp, measured, and controlled. Kimmel smirked, attempting to smooth it over. "Relax, I'm just saying what everyone is thinking. It is just a bit of fun." But it was not fun. It was the moment the mood cracked wide open. The audience's laughter had turned to uneasy glances. Even Kimmel's crew behind the cameras exchanged worried looks. Jennifer leaned forward slightly, her voice steady but icy. "Mocking a woman's personal choices is not comedy. It is cruelty disguised as entertainment." For the first time, Kimmel's confidence faltered. His smile wavered. His fingers fidgeted with the papers on his desk. "It is just comedy," he repeated weakly. "You know how it works here." The silence stretched, every second heavier than the last. Jennifer's eyes glimmered under the lights. "No, Jimmy," she said quietly, "I know exactly how it works. And tonight, you went too far." The audience could feel the shift. The stage no longer belonged to the host. Kimmel leaned back, forcing a laugh that no one joined. "If you cannot handle a joke, maybe you should not be doing interviews." That was it, the final spark before the explosion. Jennifer's composure shattered. Her voice rose, trembling with fury and truth. "You think mocking women's pain is funny?" she said, her tone slicing through the silence. "You think my personal life, my choices, my body, are just punchlines for you to use?" The crowd froze. A few people gasped. Phones came up quietly in the audience, recording what they instinctively knew would become history. Behind the scenes, producers argued whether to cut to commercial, but the moment was too powerful to interrupt. Kimmel shifted uncomfortably. "Come on, Jennifer, it is not that serious." But she cut him off sharply. "Not that serious?" she said, eyes blazing. "For you, it is a joke. For me, it has been a lifetime of disrespect." The audience was dead silent now, the only sound the faint hum of the studio lights. Jennifer's hands trembled slightly on the armrest, but her voice was steady, commanding, full of controlled rage. "Do you have any idea," she continued, "what it feels like to have strangers speculate about your worth as a woman because of your personal choices? To be reduced to a headline, to be mocked on air?" Kimmel's expression changed. The smirk vanished. For the first time, he looked small, a man stripped of control. His bandmates avoided his eyes. His sidekick stared at the floor. The power dynamic had shifted entirely. Jennifer leaned forward again, her voice soft but deadly clear. "You invited me here as a guest. You smiled, you shook my hand, and then you decided to humiliate me on live television. That is not comedy, Jimmy. That is cruelty." Every word landed like thunder. The crowd sat motionless, unsure whether to clap, gasp, or remain still. Kimmel finally stammered, "Jennifer, I did not mean," but she raised her hand sharply, silencing him. "You never mean to," she said coldly. "That is the problem." She straightened her posture, her eyes locked on him, the fury giving way to something stronger, dignity. "I have endured this for years," she said softly, smiling through it, laughing at things that hurt. "But tonight, I am done pretending." Her words lingered in the air like smoke. The cameras zoomed closer, capturing every second, the tension, the pain, the strength. And as she sat back in her chair, breathing steady, the studio realized something profound had just shifted. This was no longer entertainment. This was a reckoning. The crowd did not know whether to applaud or hold their breath. But they all understood, without a word, that something irreversible had just begun. The silence that followed was unlike anything that studio had ever experienced. No laughter, no applause, only the sound of a live audience realizing they were watching something raw and real unfold in front of them. Jennifer sat still, her breathing calm, but her eyes unflinching. Kimmel shifted uncomfortably, the weight of her words pressing on him like a spotlight that refused to dim. That he tried to laugh again, a weak attempt to regain control. "You are really going to make this serious, huh?" Jennifer tilted her head slightly, her voice calm, almost too calm. "You made it serious the moment you decided my life was your punchline." For the first time, the audience began to turn. A woman in the front row shook her head slowly. A man whispered something under his breath. Others began to murmur, sensing the change in tone. The tension had reached its breaking point, but Jennifer did not back down. Her hands rested on her lap, her posture steady, her presence commanding. "I have played along with this for years," she said, each word sharp and deliberate. "Every time a joke was made about my relationships, every time someone decided my age or my choices were worth mocking, I stayed quiet. I smiled, because that is what women in this industry are taught to do." Her gaze never left him, but not anymore. The words hung heavy in the air. Kimmel opened his mouth, but no sound came out. His signature grin had vanished completely. Behind the cameras, producers debated whether to cut the feed. But the director hesitated. Something about this felt too important to silence. Jennifer continued, "You call it comedy. I call it cruelty. Every joke at a woman's expense, every line that makes her smaller, keeps this cycle alive. You make people laugh, but you make someone else bleed." The audience was utterly silent now. Even the crew stood still, mesmerized. Then, from the back of the studio, a slow, hesitant sound broke through the quiet. Clapping. A single pair of hands, followed by another, then another. Within seconds, the entire crowd was applauding, not for humor, but for courage. Jennifer looked up, startled, her eyes softening slightly as the sound grew louder. The applause was not wild or chaotic. It was solemn, respectful. It filled the room with something that felt like redemption. Kimmel looked around, his face pale. He tried to smile, but the expression looked hollow. "This is live television," he muttered, his voice shaking. "We can talk about this after the show." Jennifer shook her head slowly. "No, we talk about it now." She leaned forward, her tone unwavering. "Do you know how many times I have been asked why I am not married, why I do not have children, why I do not fit into the image you all expect? Every time, it is the same story, a woman's worth measured by her conformity. You think it is funny, but to me, it has been exhausting." The crowd grew quieter again, waiting for what she would say next. Her voice softened, but her words carried even more weight. "I am proud of who I am, proud of the work I have done, proud of the life I built, and I will not let anyone, not you, not the tabloids, not anyone, define me by what I am not." For a moment, even the lights seemed dimmer, as if the studio itself had fallen silent in respect. Kimmel stared at his desk, avoiding her eyes. He finally spoke, barely above a whisper. "I did not realize it hurt that much." Jennifer nodded slightly. "That is the problem. You never realize until someone says it out loud." Her words echoed through the room. The tension that had once felt suffocating now turned into reflection. The audience, once laughing at a joke, was now witnessing a man being confronted by the very reality he had helped create. Kimmel took a deep breath. "You are right," he said quietly. "I crossed a line." Jennifer's expression softened slightly. "Acknowledging it is the first step," she said, her tone calm but firm. The studio sat frozen as the two locked eyes, no longer host and guest, but two people standing at the edge of accountability. After a long pause, Jennifer stood up slowly. The applause started again, louder this time, almost thunderous. She smiled faintly, nodding toward the audience, then looked back at Kimmel. "Respect goes both ways," she said gently. "Remember that." She turned and began to walk off the stage, her heels clicking softly against the floor. The cameras followed her, capturing the image that would soon flood the internet. Jennifer Aniston, walking away not in anger, but in grace. The audience rose to their feet. The applause grew into a standing ovation that filled the studio with sound. Even the band members stood, their instruments resting quietly in their hands. Kimmel remained seated for a moment, his face unreadable. He finally looked into the camera, his usual wit gone. He exhaled deeply and said, "We will be right back." But everyone watching knew they would never go back to the way things were. The next morning, the moment dominated every headline. Clips of the confrontation spread across every platform, millions of views within hours. Some called it uncomfortable, others called it brave. But one truth was undeniable. Jennifer Aniston had just changed the conversation. Her courage became a symbol. It was no longer about a late-night interview gone wrong. It was about every woman who had been silenced, every person told to laugh off their pain. And though the lights in that studio eventually dimmed, the echo of her words never faded. Sometimes, the most powerful moments on television are not scripted. They are born from truth. And that night, truth finally spoke louder than laughter.